I want to take you back to before 1972, let's put it that way. Now, in 1972, in the world of aircraft and all of this, there was the biggest company and several other stragglers. Stragglers being Bombardier, Lockheed, um, the failure of one to come to mind is another one. McDonnell Douglas, Douglas with their DC-3, and all this fancy malarkey. But at the year of 1972, Boeing had now sat back and relaxed. The competitors that they had, they'd either bought out or beaten, and everyone else who hadn't been bought out was kind of sitting on the ground, just kind of thinking, we'll make our own little planes and we won't bother Boeing. But then the EU, as an entirety, got a bit angry. They weren't happy with the fact that all European airlines were hopping over to America and buying stuff that goes straight into the Americans' bank account, as in the Americans' government, and then taking them back and asking for repairing parts and all of this. And well, the EU wasn't happy. They didn't want that. They wanted them to own all the aircrafting. Well, not to own it all. That would have been their dream, but they still don't have that. But they're still quite big, and they created Airbus. Now, some say, and I have a book all about civil aircraft, and some say that if Boeing hadn't sat back and relaxed, that they might have beaten out Airbus and they might have bought them out, but they would never be bought out. You couldn't offer enough money for Airbus to be bought out. Being run by the English, the Germans, as far as I know, and several other people creating it, I don't think you'd be able to buy it out because I think you'd be killed. I don't think they'd let you. So they kept it all very kind of secretive until the last moment when in 1972 Airbus released the A300 or the A10. Now, this was a pioneering aircraft due to the fact that it was the first big European competitor to Boeing. And they didn't just kind of stop there. Before then, there, as I said, there was just Boeing. But after the Airbus A300 was created, they also created the Airbus A320. Now, this was, of course, a lot later in 1987. And we'll get on to the Airbus A320 competitor of Boeing. If you know how cockpits work and if you can actually read, you'll already know what the competitor is because I'm flying it in FSX. And what I have to say about the A320 is I love it. It's a lovely plane, built in 1987, as I said. It's very automated, and one of its revolutionary systems is the, I believe it was one of the first civilian aircraft ever to have fly-by-wire technique, just having a stick at the side to fly your plane, to roll it and pitch it and yaw it and all this. And this was something very new. This hadn't been done before, as far as I remember, and it was very, very good. Now there's been several variations, and coming out in this year there was the Airbus A320 Neo, as far as I know. And Airbus went on to create aircraft like the A340 and the A330 and the A380, if you even want to, and they also made A350. But I want to talk a little bit about the Airbus's A320, the competitor. I love it. I fly it quite a bit in X-Plane, the Neo by Jar Designs. But the 737, built by Boeing, I believe it was originally built, I think 1970s or so. Let me just check here. 1967, yes, roughly right. So, still 5 years away from Airbus popping in. But the 737 was a small, light, short haul aircraft designed for hops around America and Europe. And it did just that, didn't it? And it got quite popular, and it was doing very well. The 737-200 had no, of course, it had no electronic instruments. It was all turned dial stuff, and it was very nice. It's a very nice plane. They then released the A330, 737-300, sorry, and this aircraft was a little bit souped up of the 737. 200 due to the fact that it had electronic instruments, which was something very, very fancy. Being able to have, well, there's no other way of putting it, having, uh, sorry, excuse me, I just said it actually. The electric instruments was a big thing, and also being able to make it a lot more easier to read. Reading an electronic dial that has most of it automated for you is a lot easier than trying to read about 60 million little turn dial instruments on a screen. Trust me. And then they moved on and they built the 737-400, which was basically the 300 except longer. The 737-500, 737-600, 737-700. And then they made the one that we're flying in FSX today, and the one that I spent a lot of time in X-Plane. The 737-800. Now the 737-800 is the one that Ryanair fly, and many airlines around the world fly. I believe that some American airlines like Delta fly it. I think American Airlines fly it. I'm not sure if United do or not, but I don't think they do. And it's always been with them. The 737-300 is still with Lufthansa, although they're kicking it out soon. And it just shows how embedded it became into their kind of millennium of airlines, all buying 737 for their best short haul aircraft. Because this was Boeing's first kind of more short haul line. They had built the 727 5 years earlier. Sorry, actually six. No, wow, I'm very good with numbers, haven't I? 4 years earlier, they built the 727, but that was more of a short haul medium, so it could go a little bit longer. Definitely not the same with the 737, but the 737 its competitor is the A320, and the A320 got very suddenly embedded in many people buying. Some of the very first A320s ever delivered were delivered to Air France, and they did an air show very soon. And if you've heard, there's actually an air crash investigation. Go check it out. But very sadly, it crashed with a lot of people. Crashed into a forest with some difficulties in flight. Trying to perform an interesting maneuver, but the A320 was much more automated. It works much more easier than the other aircraft. For instance, Aer Lingus, who are now part of British Airways, own A320s for the short haul fleet. British Airways, who did own 737s as their short haul fleet, are now all A320s. Everyone's buying the A320 because it's the little bit of a newer thing. But not for long. The 737 MAX is coming out of next year, but the A320 is releasing a competitor. Now, if you're in the argument of the 737 versus the A320, and you think, oh, for the Neo and Max argument is what I mean. If you're on the side of Boeing copied Airbus, I personally think you're wrong. And if you're on the side of Airbus copied Boeing, I also think you're wrong. The reason for that is they're completely different aircraft. They have the similar core idea, but they've expanded in completely different ways. Boeing have left it up to the pilots to make the most key decisions, while Airbus have said, we can't trust pilots that much. Many air crashes have been caused because of pilots mishandling the plane, so let's make it all done by a computer. Some people don't like that, some people do. But the 737 MAX is going to have a lot of fancy things. It basically looks like a Dreamliner except a bit smaller. It's a very fancy looking aircraft. Boeing have released a test video showing it doing fancy climbs and very interesting turns and nice things like that. And that's going to be the new thing. It's going to be the 737 MAX looking very, very beautiful. And Ryanair will probably upgrade to it, and all the people who own 737s and rely on them will probably upgrade to it. But this argument isn't just about the A320, the Friday Thoughts, it's also about the other things that Boeing have to offer. Now, Boeing in 1969 released their 747, which at 5 was the biggest plane ever built. Well, not up until then, but then it was the biggest plane, and then it became the biggest civilian plane. Now it's not anything, but still, it's big. it was one of the very first planes to a double decker idea that wasn't in a cargo mode. So it has a very fancy first class area above all the economy and business, which is very nice. And it has four huge, massive engines. I believe they were built by Pratt and Whitney. I'm not sure about that though, but it's a very interesting aircraft. It was much bigger than all the others. It was kind of, well, Boeing beats all with this aircraft, and it's very nice. It's a very nice aircraft. Now we're going to move on to the 767. Now, the 767, released in 1981, is a short haul. Very interesting. Well, I don't find it too interesting, but some people may find it more interesting than me. It's 37, and maybe even more about some of the Airbus things. But it could fit around 224 passengers with the 767 200 edition. Um, and there isn't much else to talk about. The EOR was the extended range, which they also have with other aircraft. With Boeing, they have the 777 extended range, and that means EOR, which I believe includes longer and better endurance. It has a completely EFIS, Electronic Flight Instrument Systems, cockpit, which is very interesting. And the 767 was I believe, the first Boeing aircraft built after the A320 popped out in the market. Now, the next aircraft is the 757. Now, the 757 is basically the 767, except someone got a saw and cut off a small bit of it. It's pretty much. Now, you could be probably a little bit more specific, and I'm probably being a bit blunt, but released the next year was the 757, which was the challenger for the A321, and it was kind of the upgraded 727. When I sorry, I'm going to choose Pratt and Whitney 2037 engines for their 200s, and the fuel capacity in, if you're looking for liters, convert it yourself otherwise, is 42,597 liters. It's a very different aircraft were those two. They were a bit outgoing, big, huge planes with only two engines. As far as I know, it hadn't been. But the next aircraft that Boeing released then, after all of this, was I believe, the 777. Now, the 777 has huge engines, too good for its own size. By the way, the A320 was released in 1987. So after that, if you're trying to keep track on the times. And actually, I can't stand trying to guess where they are. I'm going to just check for sure. But yeah, I was right. The A340 was then released in 1991. And the A340 has four engines. It's still used today. It's all electronic cockpit. I've seen one actually, and they're quite interesting aircraft. I don't particularly like them. I have nothing against them, but they're alright. The next aircraft that Airbus had released was this A380. Now, the A380 is a long haul aircraft like their A340, and it's kind of, well, it's still used today, the A330, and so is the A340, and so is the A320. I don't think A310s are anymore, but neither are 727s. Well, they are for freighting, but anyway. But the A330 means a little bit more to me because it's employed by Aer Lingus. Although, in my personal opinion, the the A330, sorry, is just a A320 with slightly bigger engines, and someone cut the tail off, and instead of making it a little bit longer like the A321, they just stuck it a lot longer and gave it a slightly bigger body. But that's just the outside in here. If you ever see them right beside each other, which you can if you drive by Dublin Airport sometimes, and you see Aer Lingus, you'll definitely know which one is the A330. It's the huge one compared to the other. But that's kind of where Airbus took a bit of a break at 2 and waiting to 2005 for their next aircraft. But we won't move on to that quite yet. We'll move on to 1994 when Boeing released the 777. Now, the 777 is regarded by most people as Boeing's peak. A lot of people think it's where Boeing peaked, and well, they haven't hit that peak again. But I don't really care for the 737, 777 in flight simulation and stuff. But we'll give it a go anyway. They chose Pratt& and Whitney 4,000 engines for the 777-200s, and the 200 ER also got a little bit more power. It has three wheels, well, there's six wheels on each landing gear at the back and two at the front. Um, it's a very nice aircraft. It was, as I said, it was kind of the 747, except it had the double decker and only two engines. And one of the 777 engines can bring a 747 into climb. Now, I find that kind of a bit terrifying, but anyway, it shows how powerful those engines are. But it's still employed today quite a bit. It can also be used as freighters. Air France freighters are 777s. British Airways have employed them not as freighters, but just as their normal stuff. So FedEx used them in freighters. Loads of people own the 777. Ethiopian owned the 777. Emirates owned the 777. It's a revolutionary aircraft. One of them missing, Malaysia 370. Look that up on it as well. That's a very interesting episode of Aircraft Investigation. But now it just sounds like I'm sponsored by them, which I amn't. But if they'd like to, I wouldn't mind it. That was bad. Anyway, in 2005, Airbus, which was technically still considered European, was built. Well, it still is European, but I mean that it was still owned by the EU and wasn't a private company, which it is now, as far as I know. They released the Airbus A380. Now, the A380, and up until then, the 747 was uncompeted as the biggest civilian airline. And of course, Antonov went out and kicked them out as the biggest plane ever with the Antonov AN225. But still, they were the biggest civilian. That was what Boeing cared about, and that gave them a bit of a selling point. People will go with an airline that had a 747 for long haul because you think, oh, good, one of the biggest planes ever. Well, to hell with that. Airbus released the A380. The A380 is a complete double decker rather than just the front. The entire thing. It's absolutely humongous. It has only two reversers. On its four engines, only the two inner engines have reversers, but that's because it doesn't need the outer ones at all. The thing itself is absolutely humongous. It has a ton of wheels, and it's also very comfortable. In the first class cabin, you've got beds and iPads and your own private air hostess who will come and help you and get you some stuff. And it also has, for its main instruments, they have a keyboard and a trackball to navigate and operate certain features, which I find absolutely amazing. Lufthansa flew as the very first Airbus A380, I believe, to New York in February of 2011. I don't believe it was even finished painting then. It was kind of just at the back. It was a bit military looking at the front. But anyway, they then got competed. You see, Airbus released Airbus released the A380 because they thought, in their minds, this would be a great selling plane. It will do fantastically for us, having a very beautiful first-class plane. But lo and behold, it didn't work very well, and now they're actually cutting back on their A380 production because Boeing had already realized this since the 747. Airbus were still a bit childish. They wanted to have the biggest civilian plane, but Boeing had already realized this, that airlines and people don't want absolutely humongous planes for doing ridiculously long flights. They want comfort and they want short flights. So Boeing released the 787 Dreamliner. Now, a bit like the A380, to get it onto the market was difficult, and it's already doing kind of well now, but we'll get past that. Qatar flew their very first A380, 787 on December 13, 2012. They ordered 30 of them in 2007, 2 years before it was actually completely finished and built, and it's employed by many airlines. Norwegian bought a ton of them. ANA, Qatar, I believe Ethiopian have some. I also think that the other airline, if you might have heard of them, Emirates. being sarcastic. But they have all these fancy planes, and the cockpit is very nice. Four huge screens, two for each pilot and first officer, and it's just a very nice aircraft. It's medium long haul. It's got absolutely humongous General Electric turbofan engines, and or it has Rolls-Royce Trent 1000s. They're quite big, and one of the distinctive things with the 787 is its engines are jagged at the back, which is really just for looks, and it also has a very smooth nose of an aircraft. But I've been rambling. I've rambled actually for 5 minutes too long, which is not unusual for me. But my footage runs out in about a minute or so, so I'm going to be quick with my final verdict. In my personal opinion, I like Airbus because they have differentiated it from just being one American producer doing everything, like a lot of things in the world, and that's what they did. But I find them stupid for trying to continuously push the A380 when people obviously aren't using it very well. It's still, I'd love to get on one, but the 787 Dreamliner is a very nice aircraft, very smooth, and they've also released the 777. It's a very smooth aircraft, and that's what I do like about Boeing. They have all these lovely, smooth, beautiful looking planes. Not saying that some of Airbus's aren't. I have to say the A320 is very nice looking as an aircraft, but I do love the 737-800. It's my favourite aircraft that's ever been built, and I say my final verdict of my favourite of the two manufacturers is going to be Boeing, because I love a lot of their planes. I love what their planes work and everything about them, and I hope you've enjoyed this little ramble. Don't think that I don't like Airbus, and ladies and gentlemen, have a good day.